Do you in any way see the positives of this DOGE drive, Jennifer?
I think I hoped to see positives. I've been a big advocate for real significant renovation of government for a long time. And as Kurt said, I've been hoping that it would move faster. I think, unfortunately, what we're seeing is moving far too fast and not with the right intent. So if you want to renovate government, that's sort of like pulling it back down to the studs. What we're seeing now is really pulling up the core foundations of our government, the principles on which it was established, and that is not going to increase state capacity, which is what our report is about. State capacity is just the ability of government to achieve its policy goals. Like, we have incredibly important challenges that we need to face as a government. We need a stronger state, not a destroyed state.
Jennifer, you've talked about how government and perhaps some political parties more than others have focused too much on process, not outcomes. How, in a perfect world, could you see perhaps DOGE playing a role in advancing technology, really helping government perform better?
We certainly do need more focus on outcomes over process. We don't need no process. And what's happening right now is not just looking deeply at what processes could be simplified, but actually not respecting the law. And what I had hoped DOGE would do is go in and say, okay, these things can be cleaned up. Oh, and by the way, some of these laws are holding us back. Let's go to Congress and have them fixed so that we can operate in a more streamlined and outcomes-oriented way. Instead, they're just sort of rolling roughshod over the law, which is, again, sort of the principle of our government and very dangerous.
I mean, if you were to give lawmakers perhaps some advice on, how to clean some of this up, how to regain some of the trust and credibility that perhaps DOGE can bring, what advice would you bring them?
Well, we have 4 major pillars that we think need to happen, and they should happen regardless of DOGE. I think we're in a very chaotic moment, but there will be moments when we can look back at this agenda. We essentially say 4 things. If you want a government that can do what it says it's going to do, you need to be able to hire the right people and fire the wrong ones. You need to reduce the procedural bloat. You need to invest in digital and data infrastructure in smart ways, not just cutting people off, but actually building what does work. And lastly, we need to close the loop, the feedback loop between policymakers and the outcomes that actually come from our laws and policies. Right now, we're just sort of putting things out there and hoping that we get what we want without doing what the private sector does, which is really say, is this working as we're going? Can we check in? Can lawmakers and others sort of work with the executive branch in new ways to say, let's tweak this as it goes along so that we get the outcomes that our laws and policies intend? I still think all of these things can be done, but it's very hard to do it in the current environment of sort of chaos and fear.
Chaos, fear, but also speed, and that's often what the private sector brings. And as you say, a lot of your offerings and prioritization here feel like very private sector orientation of prioritizing talent, of streamlining processes. Realistically, if they didn't, as you quote, run roughshod, if they went along with Congress, how much longer would that take? Are the incentives of politicians aligned with ultimately remaking with efficiency?
I think the incentives of politicians come from the people, and that the people need to ask their politicians to be more focused on the how of government and not just the what. Whatever you want government to do, it has to actually be able to do it. And I think if the people say, look, this matters, how we are structured to achieve our policy goals, they will ultimately be responsive to that. Right now, again, it's very hard because there's so much chaos going on, but I do think we'll get to a place where that conversation can happen. Yes, it would be a little bit slower, and yes, I have called for things to move faster, but the core foundations of our government are good, and we should be protecting them right now as well.
Is Elon, is the so-called Department of Government Efficiency the right arbiter of this if they do it in the right way?
Elon, I think, has shown that he's not going to do it in a way that's consistent with the core values of our government, unfortunately. We still need it done, but we need it done probably first at the state and local level so that we can show how to do it right, and then bring it back to the federal government and do it the way that it needs to be done for the American people.